notifications ping, attention splinters, and, well, the day just disappears. Welcome to Bookcast Story Channel. This is Bookcast number 4, and we're exploring short-term dopamine addiction, the invisible killer warping the brain and eroding deep work. Stay with us for hopefully a friendly, eye-opening guide from feeling scattered to deeply focused. In a world that really rewards constant stimulation, it feels like our focus is just quietly being stolen. We live in an environment that seems engineered almost to demand and reward the shallow, the immediate, over the things that are more profound and enduring. So today, let's try to slow down a bit and uncover exactly how this focus is being stolen, what the true costs are, and honestly, we're talking about far more than just lost time, and maybe most importantly, how we can systematically start to take back control.
Yeah, and this deep dive today feels crucial because the sources we're looking at, they don't just, complain about technology. They offer a really interesting cross-cultural analysis. They really dissect the core, the biological mechanism of instant gratification, and then they map out its profound, multi-layered consequences. It's fascinating how they draw connections between neurochemistry and these older Eastern principles of self-mastery. The goal, I think, is to move beyond just blaming ourselves. We need to understand this isn't really a personal moral failing. It feels more like a systemic technological hijacking of our own motivation system.
It really does. And it's so pervasive, isn't it? We often do it completely unconsciously. We just become these automated responders to pings from outside. So I have to ask you, listening right now, when was the last time you checked your phone without truly knowing why you picked it up in the first place, just reflexively? Okay, let's unpack this central mechanism then, because everything really seems to pivot on dopamine. Our sources rightly call it the two-faced neurotransmitter. I mean, it's absolutely essential for us, right? The core of our biological reward system. But we need to remind ourselves, what was its original job, evolutionarily speaking?
Well, its role was entirely about survival and optimization. Dopamine was designed to motivate sustained action,
Right.
to drive learning through, repetition, and to sustain persistence toward long-term goals. Think about our ancestors, right?
Mm-hmm.
A successful hunt, maybe after days of tracking or patiently building a shelter. Those things provided a strong, satisfying dopamine release. But that reward was deliberately delayed. It required significant effort, and that encouraged them to repeat that effortful behavior. It's the same mechanism that drives us to master a complex skill over years, or maybe build a deep, meaningful relationship that takes real emotional labor.
So if we kind of strip away the common mislabeling, dopamine isn't strictly the pleasure chemical itself. It's more like the motivation chemical.
Exactly. It's the internal engine constantly signaling, seek more, or do that again, or maybe keep trying. The reward is worth waiting for.
It's about the anticipation, the seeking, not so much the getting.
Precisely. It's the anticipation and the seeking, not the actual consumption. Now let's contrast that with the modern distortion. Technology platforms, social media feeds, those rapid-fire video clips, games with microtransactions, they've effectively, weaponized this system. They seem explicitly designed to bypass patience, to eliminate effort. They provide this near-constant, immediate, low-barrier stimulation.
Can you give us some specific examples? What are the components of that digital dose?
Sure. Every single scroll down an infinite feed, every little notification ping, every short video clip you watch, or every like you get on a post. It's engineered to deliver a tiny, fleeting, instant hit of satisfaction. And crucially, this mechanism requires basically zero sustained effort from the user.
Yeah.
You don't have to study for 3 hours or spend weeks crafting something meaningful. You just flick your thumb.
That design is key, isn't it? We're conditioning the brain to expect the reward before the effort, or maybe simultaneously with it, or often, with no real effort at all.
Mm-hmm.
It's truly like turning our sophisticated motivational system into a kind of perpetual slot machine, where every pull gives a tiny, immediate payout.
That analogy is incredibly precise. You're essentially feeding the brain neurological fast food.
Mhm.
It's engineered for maximum palatability, high stimulation, intense flavor, but it contains zero long-term nutritional value for, say, cognitive health or emotional stability. And the consequence of this constant diet is that the brain is rapidly being, chemically and structurally reprogrammed, restructured even.
How so? What does that reprogramming look like?
It creates kind of psychological aversion, actually. The brain stops valuing complex, effortful, long-term fulfillment. Things like the sustained concentration needed for deep learning, or the emotional discipline required for building strong family ties. Why? Because efforts start to feel like an overpayment. The brain knows subconsciously that it can get a similar, albeit shallow, reward instantly and effortlessly somewhere else.
So the deep life, the life of genuine accomplishment, profound relationships that starts to feel neurologically burdensome, the brain just asks, why struggle with this dense book when I can get 50 hits of validation scrolling in the same minute?
Exactly. And that preference generates this vicious, self-perpetuating cycle.
Hmm.
The quick fix gives temporary relief, sure, but because the reward was empty, it didn't satisfy a real, intrinsic need. You quickly crash into fatigue or a sense of emptiness. And the only mechanism the rewired brain trusts to fix that emptiness is seeking more stimulus immediately. This magnetic loop doesn't just make you tired. It actively degrades executive function, it compromises cognitive ability, and it weakens your willpower. It makes it harder and harder to break free.
It's a dependency.
A deep dependency, yes. And it prevents the individual from ever really engaging in sustained deep work or tackling true intellectual challenges.
That is a powerful trap. And maybe the best way to start breaking it is just to recognize our personal triggers. So let's be honest right now. What's your single biggest digital distraction? The platform or habit that gives you that quickest, easiest dopamine hit. Just name it to yourself.
Now, if we widen the lens a bit, from the individual to the societal level, this short-term dopamine addiction starts to look like what our sources accurately call a silent epidemic. It's not physically visible like, say, the flu, but it's deeply corrosive. It's eroding the very fabric of human potential. We're seeing measurable drops in attention spans, a fracturing of cognitive depth, and diminishing social intelligence across entire populations, especially, it seems, in younger generations.
And this erosion, it creates some very observable symptoms, doesn't it? I think the first and maybe most straightforward one is the stark loss of deep reading and patience. You really do see it everywhere, this overwhelming preference for short, easily digestible, often sensationalized content.
And when patience for complexity erodes like that, people just can't sustain interest. If an activity, whether it's a conversation or a project, doesn't provide immediate entertainment or satisfaction, they just tune out. Instantly. They won't engage with a dense academic paper or even a nuanced 2,000-word article. They want summaries, bullet points, high-intensity visuals. And this inability to sit with complexity severely restricts their ability to acquire sophisticated knowledge, develop critical thinking, or appreciate nuanced perspectives. Learning inevitably becomes, well, superficial and transient.
The second symptom is maybe more visceral, more destabilizing, emotional volatility. If we're constantly bathing our brains in these rapid-fire sequences of intense stimuli, it seems impossible to maintain any sense of emotional equilibrium.
That really is the reality. The nervous system is constantly being whipsawed between these manufactured highs and rapid lows. You get a sudden rush of euphoria from, I don't know, a viral moment or a pile of likes, followed almost instantly by boredom, anxiety, or even a low-grade depression the moment the screen goes dark. This state of hyperstimulation leads directly to extremely poor impulse control. The person becomes easily irritated, may be prone to emotional outbursts, or finds themselves trapped in a state of chronic anxiety because their nervous system is just permanently set to high alert.
And this deep internal disquiet, it connects directly to that profound Eastern philosophical concept you mentioned earlier, the restless mind state. The sources talk about the inability to achieve gum ki tu ton in tam. Can you break that down for us? What does that mean? Gathering energy, focusing the spirit, and stabilizing the mind.
Yes, gum kito tantintam. This is where the cost becomes almost metaphysical, not just psychological. When the mind is constantly being pulled by these non-stop external information streams, it loses its ability to internally settle. The vital energy, the key, you could think of it as life force, it gets dispersed externally. If you cannot stabilize your mind, you are fundamentally losing your inner power, your noyak, that internal strength and the clarity you need for conscious, directed living. It literally manifests as kitan, fan-scattered energy and dispersed spirit. It's a state that renders true, deep concentration impossible.
Wow. It sounds like we're sacrificing our inner foundation for, wow, fleeting entertainment.
We are. And the final symptom, perhaps the most subtle one, is societal normalization. We don't just tolerate this behavior. We actively structure society around it. Quick entertainment is marketed aggressively as a necessary stress reliever, even a form of acceptable self-care.
You deserve a break. Just scroll for a bit.
Exactly. And the irony is cruel. By seeking temporary relief through these instant fixes, we inadvertently condition ourselves into becoming the perfect consumer. Algorithms and external demands start dictating our attention and our actions. We lose genuine autonomy.
Hmm.
And the individual often begins to view the vast amounts of time wasted on endless scrolling as either acceptable or, worse, somehow mandatory for surviving in the modern world. Society profits by feeding the addiction, and then it leverages the resulting lack of focus to sell as more distraction.
That's why it's an epidemic.
It's structurally reinforced, yes.
And that reinforcement makes recovery so challenging. It forces us to question our default state. Maybe ask yourself this. How often do you feel restless, anxious, or just fundamentally compelled to grab your phone after only a few minutes of total silence or stillness? Hashtag tag 3. The multi-layered consequences, destruction of key, nif, and fun.
Okay, so now we need to move beyond just the psychological and social effects and explore the really profound multi-layered destruction outlined in the topic. This draws heavily from deep Eastern philosophical principles regarding energy, causation, and destiny. This addiction, by consuming our attention and willpower, it really compromises one's fundamental energetic and spiritual foundation. Hashtag, hashtag, energetic consequences. Key hack.
Let's start with key, then vital energy. If key is our fundamental life force, how exactly does it get scattered when the mind is constantly chasing shallow stimulation? And what's the difference between this kind of energy loss and, just feeling tired after a long day?
That's a great question. The difference is really about depth. When the mind is unsettled, the sensory gates are constantly thrown open. This forces our vital energy to rush outwards to process all this non-essential, superficial data. It's wasted, essentially, instead of being available for deep internal work. This rapid consumption of fast content, it rapidly depletes Dunki, that's our positive, active, dynamic energy. So it's not just fatigue, it's the depletion of the very energy required for purposeful external action.
So we're basically exhausting our most active, precious energy supply on the scrolling equivalent of noise. What are the specific long-term health and mental symptoms that come from this depleted energy state?
The sources are very specific about how this key depletion manifests. Firstly, individuals often suffer from chronic fatigue, even without heavy physical labor. It's a deep, pervasive tiredness that sleep doesn't seem to fix. They also suffer from anxiety and unrest. The term used is tam hung, which translates quite literally to heart-mind panic.
Heart-mind panic. Wow. That sounds much more serious than just general anxiety. How does it relate specifically to the constant influx of stimuli?
Well, clinical anxiety is often situational, right? But tam hung, in this context, seems to stem from a literal internal energy breakdown. The constant highs and lows of cheap dopamine destabilize the nervous and emotional centers, making the mind prone to rapid fear, worry, and that flight response. And because the spirit, the tunki, is dispersed, the individual has a weak spirit, or tunto. This results in poor perception mutmo, which means dim eyes. They struggle to see things clearly, grasp nuanced arguments, or even perceive hidden opportunities.
Dim eyes. Interesting.
And finally, they suffer from chaotic thinking tantre.
Okay, explain tantri first. Does that just mean disorganized thoughts? Like my desk.
Maybe a bit like that, but more severe internally. Tantrai means the inability to maintain a logical sequence long enough to solve a complex problem or follow a sustained argument. It's the scattering of the intellect itself. If we were to use modern terms, it mirrors a severe deficit in executive function. The individual can start tasks, sure, but they lack the mental infrastructure to plan, prioritize, resist distraction, and actually complete them. These aren't minor inconveniences. They are structural indicators of a severe depletion of life energy and internal strength, or Neutluk. Hashtag be karmic consequences. Neutluk.
Okay, moving on to the concept of Neutluk, or causality. We generally understand that our repetitive choices shape our destiny in a way. How does the constant choice for instant gratification create a negative karmic chain, a chain of causality that impacts our future?
Well, Neutluk basically defines the behavioral and psychological patterns we ingrain through repeated, often unconscious action. By consistently choosing the path of least resistance, the immediate reward over the long-term effortful goal, we're actively sowing specific negative seeds within ourselves.
What kind of seeds?
The sources identify 3 primary seeds sown by this cheap dopamine cycle. We sow the seed of laziness, always defaulting to the path of comfort. We sow the seed of instability, or badin, by constantly shifting our attention, which undermines commitment. And critically, we sow the seed of procrastination, tritrend, by prioritizing temporary pleasure over essential, often difficult,
work.
Okay, so the sum total of all these small, repeated choices, choosing the scroll over the book, the game over the project that accumulates into the nip, the deep subconscious, maybe even self-sabotaging pattern.
Precisely. The accumulation of these three C's forms a profound nip that eventually dictates our subconscious responses. The person becomes conditioned to living superficially, actively avoiding challenges, and consistently seeking external escape whenever effort is required. And this accumulated negative pattern has massive long-term material impact across three specific domains.
Right. This is where I might push back a little, just playing devil's advocate for a skeptical listener. If I spend, say, 2 hours scrolling TikTok tonight, how does that actually affect my wealth prospect, my Taiwan in the long term? That feels like a huge leap.
It's not a direct, immediate leap. No, it's more like an accumulated erosion of capacity. The sources argue that significant wealth and career success are built on sustained perseverance and deep focus. So if your underlying yip, your ingrained pattern, is one of instability and procrastination, you simply won't sustain the 10,000 hours of effort required to truly master a field or lead a complex organization.
Right.
Therefore, the pattern itself destroys prospects for wealth, Taiwan, because the underlying perseverance just isn't there to create or maintain it. It also prevents career achievement, due to a fundamental lack of focus and dedication. Furthermore, and this is perhaps the most alarming consequence, this pattern can even erode ethical responsibility, or didact.
How so?
Because the person becomes so focused on managing their own constant need for immediate personal gratification that they lose the perspective, the patience, needed to fulfill their duties to others, their families, their communities, society. The world gets filtered through the lens of what can I take easily, rather than what must I contribute diligently. #see destiny consequences. Men. Okay, this brings us to the final layer. Vund, or destiny, the sort of overall inevitable outcome of these deeply ingrained internal patterns. If our key is scattered and our yup is defined by instability, how does that compromise our ability to control our overall destiny? Well, the individual becomes structurally incapable of shaping a substantial future. They simply lack the inner resources the Neulach required to perform deep, complex, high-value work. They have no resilience been lent to overcome adversity because they've literally trained their brain to seek immediate escape whenever things get difficult or uncomfortable. And they lack the dignified presence kida, you could call it gravitas, needed to lead or inspire others. A mind that lacks internal depth just can't project genuine authority.
So the inner state, that chaotic state of being, it automatically translates into a poor external presentation. Is that the idea?
It's seen as an unavoidable reflection, yes. This is where the concept of tung sui comes in the tired, depleted appearance. The external signs can include those dull, lifeless eyes, maybe grayish or tired-looking skin, and just a general lack of confident presence mot thun, losing one's spirit or presence. The vital energy simply isn't there to project vitality or confidence, which in turn makes them less capable of attracting positive relationships or opportunities.
And the ultimate material consequence seems to circle back to financial stability, but viewed from a different angle. Your destiny cannot retain wealth.
Yes, that point is critical. Someone might achieve temporary success, maybe they luck into some wealth. But without the underlying persistence, the deep work capacity, and the inner stability, the det tum, to manage, grow, and sustain that success, it will inevitably slip away. The lack of these core Neulach qualities means their future remains fundamentally unstable. They'll be constantly challenged by setbacks that they are emotionally and energetically ill-equipped to handle. You just cannot sustain a deep life with a shallow mind.
Okay, that deep dive into the costs was pretty sobering. But the foundational realization here is that this dependency, this pattern, it isn't permanent. We actually have a really comprehensive set of strategies here as a direct toolkit to detox the mind and maybe forcefully rebuild that intrinsic reward system. We're talking about reclaiming our agency. Let's transition now to how we can actually fight back.
Right. The initial and most critical action has to be detox. Or, put simply, aggressively controlling the sensory inputs we allow into our minds. We have to become the absolute gatekeepers of our own attention.
And we can use technology against itself here, right? Starting with things like time management apps to strictly limit social media usage time.
Absolutely. Those tools introduce crucial conscious friction. When you hit that limit, you're forced to make a deliberate choice, which helps break the automatic loop. But we probably need to go further, with more proactive disconnection. We need to establish something like a digital detox day, or maybe even just a consistent half day, like Sunday morning perhaps, completely free from all digital devices and addictive content. This allows the brain to experience genuine, non-stimulated rest and refocus on real-world sensory input.
And we have to be pretty ruthless about eliminating the biggest triggers, too. The sources call for aggressively deleting or restricting platforms that are specific dopamine hubs. What exactly defines a hub in this context?
A hub is basically anything designed specifically for that short-form, rapid, high-stimulation content. Think TikTok, Instagram Reels, YouTube Shorts, or any news app that really prioritizes sensationalism and constant pings. These platforms operate outside the zone of moderate, healthy dopamine release. They are, neurologically speaking, like high-fructose corn syrup, instant energy, zero benefit, and ultimately destructive to the system. Removing them severely minimizes the easy availability of those quick, empty fixes. Okay, so once we've started clearing out the neurological junk food, the next step is teaching the brain to enjoy the nutritious food again. This is all about deliberately creating a new, sustainable, intrinsic reward system.
And the starting point has to be small and consistent, right?
Yeah.
Like daily deep focus practice. We have to treat concentration like a muscle, starting with something manageable, maybe 30 minutes of uninterrupted time.
Yes, exactly. Dedicate that time every single day to high concentration, single task activities, definitely not multitasking. This could be reading a dense chapter, writing a focused report, maybe diligently learning a new technical skill. The goal is to gradually increase the duration, aiming for maybe 90 or 120 minutes eventually. We're essentially proving to the brain that sustained, difficult effort yields a higher quality, more sustainable reward than just instant scrolling.
And the crucial element here, which ties right back to the dopamine mechanism, is the reward structure itself. After that deep work is done, the reward has to be a meaningful reward, something that is not fast entertainment.
Absolutely. If you reward 90 minutes of focused work with 30 minutes of scrolling, you've just neurologically reinforced the wrong behavior. You've basically told your brain, see, the real prize is the instant hit. The reward must be healthy, low dopamine, and intrinsically valuable. Maybe 5 minutes of breath meditation, a solitary walk in nature, practicing a non-digital musical instrument, or even focused journaling. These activities reinforce the value of effort and stillness.
That makes sense.
And this strategy is really enhanced by dopamine journaling. Every evening, just take a few minutes to reflect. Did I seek false gratification today? Where did I get a quick fix? What healthy rewards did I earn through genuine effort? This practice raises awareness and significantly improves accountability. It shifts control back to the conscious mind.
Okay, so to withstand the constant temptation and rebuild that foundation that was eroded, the key in the ton, we need to actively build internal strength, Neulach. What specific practices help stabilize the mind and enhance self-control?
The sources strongly emphasize mind-body practices that actively ground the individual and stabilize the nervous system. These include things like Qigong, focused breath meditation, long solitary walks, or even structured physical practices like kneeling practice, lay foot in some traditions, or focused chanting, Trichu.
How do practices like Qigong or kneeling specifically counteract that scattered mind state, the tan tree we talked about?
Well, they are essentially the direct antidote to Qi-tan, or scattered energy. They force the individual to anchor their attention firmly to their body, their breath, and a repetitive, slow action. This is the actual process of achieving Kongqi Tu Tan, Dun Tam gathered the scattered energy, focusing the spirit and stabilizing the mind. It builds internal stillness as a robust default state, rather than something fragile you have to constantly force. When the mind is still, it can better resist the external pull of the instant fix.
That makes a lot of sense.
And finally, part of protecting that hard-won internal stillness involves actively managing relationships. We need to limit, or at least carefully filter, contact with individuals who consistently spread negative energy, engage in constant complaining, or have very emotionally unstable lives. They can act as energetic drains, constantly pulling a focused mind back into distraction, stress, and negativity, which is exactly the state that leads us back to seeking cheap dopamine for relief.
Okay, finally, we have to move past just analyzing and into immediate, maybe even aggressive action. The central message here seems captured in that phrase, Root Gumhan, drawing the sword of action. The clarity of this message feels critical. Do not wait for inspiration, simply begin.
Yes, the sword of action connotation implies decisive, almost martial initiation. Procrastination is really an addiction to comfort, often masked by the desire for perfect conditions or waiting for the right mood. We have to override that inertia with an immediate start, even if it's the smallest possible action, just to break the psychological grip. And hand in hand with initiation is the need to embrace imperfection. The fear of not being perfect often delays action indefinitely. It's another form of emotional avoidance, really. We have to view incompleteness, errors, struggle as necessary, essential parts of learning and growth, not reasons to stop or give up.
Right, progress over perfection.
Exactly. This philosophy culminates in the switch. The moment that familiar, addictive urge to grab your phone or start scrolling arises, you must consciously, deliberately redirect that energy.
How? Redirect it where?
That redirection must be immediate and, ideally, productive. Channel that sudden surge of energy or anxiety into meaningful output. The mantra is, don't scroll more, write more, build more, live more. It's about fundamentally changing your identity from being a passive consumer seeking external input to an active producer generating internal output.
That shift from consumption to creation, that feels incredibly powerful. Just think about the potential energy change there. If you replace just one scrolling session right now with one deep hour, what focused, meaningful thing would you create?
Okay, as we move toward the final takeaways, let's maybe reframe this challenge for anyone listening who feels overwhelmed right now. If you're struggling with focus, remember this fundamental truth. Distraction isn't necessarily a reflection of moral weakness. It's often the predictable product of sophisticated, intentional platform design. Your focus is a muscle. And like any muscle that has maybe atrophied a bit, it can be systematically trained and rehabilitated. Recognizing this external structural issue is so vital because it removes that burden of overwhelming self-blame, which often what traps people in that negative circuit we discussed. When we look at the process graphically, as it's presented in the topic, we see a definitive mapping of the self-destruction cycle, or Vangsoi tu Hosia.
Right. Let's walk through that cycle again in detail so listeners can maybe identify where they might be in it.
Okay. It begins with seeking instant stimulus. The brain registers the pleasure and the ease fund of that interaction. This repetition actively shifts neural circuits, prioritizing those immediate reward pathways. This structural change then leads, almost inevitably, to the loss of interest in deep, slow tasks, because they just feel boring or even painful by comparison. The result? Procrastination, behavioral errors, which in turn breeds self-blame and mounting stress.
And the stress demands relief.
Exactly. That stress is unpleasant, so the rewired brain searches for the fastest path to relief, which is usually a search for new stimulus. And that restarts the cycle, often with increased intensity.
It really is designed to be a behavioral prison, but the sources provide concrete proof that it can be broken. That real-world example of the teen doomed student who rebuilt their focus is really encouraging here.
Yes, this student was really trapped, struggling with a consistent pattern, a mix of 30 minutes of YouTube followed by 15 minutes of TikTok. A pretty common pattern, actually. But they implemented a rigorous counter-strategy. The 90-minute focus block, immediately followed by a 30-minute meaningful reward. Importantly, they paired this with a specific non-digital ritual combining tea and structured handwriting practice during their reward time.
And what was the measurable result of introducing that structure and that kind of low dopamine reward?
The recovery of their focus capacity was apparently significant and rapid. In just 3 weeks, the neurological circuits had begun to stabilize enough that the student experienced a burst of creative output and real-world success, finishing tasks that had been stalled for months. This really proves that the brain's reward system and focus capacity aren't permanently damaged. They are highly trainable and resilient if given the right inputs and structure.
That really is the ultimate takeaway, isn't it? The system is trainable, but it demands active intervention. It's not about achieving perfect discipline instantly, but about consistently making that small choice again and again to break the old circuit and reinforce the new one.
Precisely. To truly master your destiny, you have to stop letting cheap, easy dopamine lead your brain around. The key to long-term success, sustained wealth, profound internal peace. It lies entirely in mastering your sensory input, establishing a robust system of intrinsic, effort-based rewards, and diligently rebuilding healthy neural action circuits. The entire goal is really encapsulated in that final maxim of self-mastery, to cut the negative circuit and rebuild the bright circuit. That's the path to achieving a life of depth, peace, and genuine self-mastery.
So after hearing this detailed plan for detox, rewiring, and rebuilding, what's one small, specific step you'll try after this podcast? Start small, but maybe start now.
That's today's conversation on the Bookcast Story Show.
We're Sam and Lily. Thank you so much for being here with us.
If today's talk opened new thoughts for you,
Please like this video and subscribe so you won't miss future chapters.